On the heels of Governor Hochul's State of the State, we sit down today with Will Barclay, the Assembly Minority Leader. Thank you so much for coming on with us, Leader.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, so the governor went on for about an hour today after some performances, that is, in the Egg, a bit of a different feel than the previous years, which were in the chamber. How did you feel about the overall day of the State of the State?
The performances or what the governor had to say? I thought they both actually were great. You know, I always like to have the State of the State in the chamber because obviously I have a seat there in the chamber. It's very comfortable. I'm always front and center. And I think it's sort of an august type body that's kind of nice to do the State of the State. I got to say the Egg wasn't as bad. Governor Cuomo used to do it in the convention center. So the Egg was a fine, I think, venue. Ultimately, you know, I thought the variety show that started off was fine. But her speech, interesting, I've been saying, welcome to the party, Governor, because these are issues that she talked about in her State of the State that Republican Assembly members have been talking about for some time. The two biggest things, affordability and crime. I like what she proposed on affordability. It's something that we've been proposing. She talked about a middle-class tax cut. Great. She talked about the inflation rebate, which I'm not against that because it does give money back to the taxpayers. But it seems a little inefficient to tax people and then give their money back to them. And it's only a one-shot deal. I'd rather see, like she proposed, middle-class tax cuts. So, and
I think that's what came through after she initially talked about the checks. People said, "Where is your long-lasting fix?" And that probably is part of that, right? And you're just going to mention the child
tax credit, which is great. So I mean, we've been proposing for a number of years here in the Assembly, and sadly the majority's been holding our bill. So now that the governor's proposing the same thing, I'm hoping that they'll look at it in a kind of a better light.
How about the Universal School Meals Initiative? That was announced last week.
So I want to get a little bit more on that because my understanding, school lunches and breakfasts are currently free, but they're done by means. So if you are wealthy, you don't get that free lunch. So I'm not sure I quite understand the idea of giving that universally, but we'll see what the cost is. I think what the argument is, the cost isn't that much more substantial just to provide it to everybody. So if it's not that much more substantial, presumably we could be supportive of it, but I'd want to see what the cost is.
I want to say it was about 200,000 more kids of the 2.7 million or whatever it would be.
Well, that seems pretty substantial, but so, ultimately we spend too much in the state. We have to set what our priorities are. Giving free lunches to wealthy students, I don't know if that should be one of our first priorities. We certainly want to be able to provide food and, lunches and breakfast to those who can't afford it. I do agree that that's a worthy policy goal, but so it's those kind of details. These sound great from a sort of rhetorical standpoint, but we do have to pass a budget, and we think we overspend in the state, so hard decisions have to be made very often.
One more on the affordability. I'm gonna get to the spending aspect. She added it up for everybody. Said $5,000 back in people's pockets, I guess, is to use her words. Does that move the needle enough, do you think, to help people come back to New York? We talk about out-migration so much.
Well, certainly they're a step in the right direction, let's say that. I mean, whether $5,000 is enough, $10,000 is enough, it's taken us decades. We've dug ourselves in a hole because, as we say, we spend too much and we tax too much in New York. So pulling some of that back, I think, is the right direction. How much of an effect it will have on people leaving the state, who knows? But I got to think affordability is one of the reasons people aren't staying in New York. Anything that we can do to address affordability, I think, goes a ways to trying to keep people here.
You've been saying that some of these policies, the child tax credit, was listening to you, the Republicans. And I actually had a conversation with Mary Beth Walsh a few days ago about her obviously being now running the floor, and some of the debates leading to chapter amendments, and how a lot of times, in some cases, Republicans vote, even if they voted no, might vote yes because of some of those things. Do you think that's a product of the governor listening to the Republic? I guess, who do you think she's listening to when it comes to some of these policies that you resonate with?
Well, I hope she's listening to us. I mean, we don't have the votes here, but we do have the bully pulpit, and we certainly speak our mind that we think on things that we think is good public policy. That being said, I think she also can read a poll. We're all elected officials. We know what our constituencies are thinking. New Yorkers are saying over and over, every poll says the top big issues they have: affordability, crime, and migrants. Those are three big issues. She didn't mention migrants, interestingly, but she did talk about affordability and crime. So whether she's listening to Republican talking points or she's actually listening to New Yorkers, it doesn't make a difference to me, as long as she proposes common sense proposals to try to address those issues.
We'll get to some of those things in a moment, but before we go for this portion that'll air during our newscast. Finally, I just wanted to ask, this morning you had a press conference, the Republicans alongside Mike Lawler, Rob Ortt, there was a complete Republican calling out Governor Hochul. I guess with that rhetoric, it was obviously very critical for her. How do you, I guess, come to middle ground to be able to work with her at this point.
Yeah, well,
knowing that some of that stuff is being said and thought of at the end of the day.
I've always said this is nothing personal in this thing. I believe, what we ought to be doing in New York is lowering taxes. Democrats might not agree with me, doesn't mean I dislike them. When I think the governor's wrong, I'm going to call her out. Before this State of the State, she was mentioning affordability, but I said in the press conference, you can't say you're for affordability when you're raising congestion pricing and charging people $9 a drive in New York City. You can't say affordability when you're passing, she didn't mention this in her speech, but she talks about cap and trade. That's going to raise utility rates. You can't say you're for affordability and then pass those type of policies that are going to end up costing New Yorkers more. So, and I mentioned the rebate too this morning. So, yeah, I'm not going to agree with everything she's talking about. I think, we'll talk about crime and get into that real details. But ultimately, when middle class tax cut, I think she'll get very strong support from the Republican conference. So when she proposes something and pushes for something that we agree with, we're totally on board.
Let's get to the public safety part. And I'm curious if you think this initiative that she spoke of last week in terms of this involuntary commitment and opening that up, expanding what can happen there, Kendra's Law, something else that your conference has pushed for in previous years, does that equate to public safety? Does that fix public safety? And how much?
Well, I think there's a lot we can do in public safety. Certainly involuntary commitment may be one solution. Obviously, a lot of people are committing those crimes on the subway and elsewhere on our streets have mental illness that's not being addressed. So one credit I'll give to the governor, she has, ever since she's been elected as governor, has stressed mental illness. I always said that's an issue we could work in a bipartisan manner on, because I happen to believe that too, not just adult mental illness, but mental illness for children too. I think there's a lot more we can do as a state. Whether that solves the crime problem we have in New York, one thing she didn't mention, because she's partly responsible for these policies getting put in place, is bail reform, is raise the age, is the parole reform that she's talking about, or that she pushed, signed bills to change, let more people out on parole. So I think those issues need to be addressed alongside with a whole menu of issues on criminal justice.
Discovery reform was one of those that came along. She did address that today. Was that enough for you to get that down the line? Because I have seen some justice groups already push back against that, which tells you that it does move the needle, I guess, a little bit more.
And I was pleased to see, I noticed there's DAs, county DAs at the State of the State, and they stood up during that. So again, I don't know what the details, exactly what she's proposing, but we've heard from prosecutors that these discovery rules are too onerous, and ultimately they can't give a speedy trial and have to dismiss. They don't have the resources. So I was pleased, as she's mentioned, even a little bit is a step in the right direction.
She did mention repeat offenders and trying to crack down on that. I think that came along with the mental health initiative, but also the judge's role in this. I think she's been more critical of how they've been adjudicating the current statute of bail reform.
Yeah,
said that she gave them, I think it was 2 years ago now, she said she gave them discretion. Doesn't feel like she's going to push it any farther. There hasn't been much talk about that on the other side of the aisle. I guess, do judges need more training? Do they need more, do they need more knowledge of what is on the books right now?
This is what the problem is. When you make public policy without getting input from those people that know the best, and when we talk about criminal justice reforms, the people that know that best are the judges, they are the prosecutors, they are the law enforcement, the policemen. Those are the people on the front line. When they passed bail reform, when they passed raise the age, they didn't listen to any of those people. Everything that they predicted, that the law enforcement judges and prosecutors predicted happened. They said this would happen, it ended up happening. So, I always laugh when they say, well, the judges don't know how, the majorities were saying that too, the judges aren't applying this right. The judges know exactly what they're doing. They know what the parameters they can do. I don't think we can question, county court judges. They know the criminal law better than anybody. It's not like they don't know how to press. So I always think that's the wrong direction. What you're trying to do is cover for bad public policy by blaming someone else for why there's a problem from the public policy that we passed.
The only thing I'll counter with there or ask you about is, we have seen now judges be politicized in one way or another. We've seen lawfare take place, and I think both parties have complained about that now. I guess we had that case up in Saratoga.
As you may recall from this weekend, we had discussed the fact that the court could not set bail, had no discretion to do so. I certainly would have under all the circumstances, but my hands are tied.
Where the individuals were set without bail, they were able to go, and the judge says, with the great state of New York. I guess is that a political statement? Do you think some judges are making political statements by releasing an offender?
I hope they're not. I mean, I haven't seen that or know that. I think that's very dangerous. I tend to trust the judges want to do adjudicate for the right reasons. I hope they're not doing it for political reasons, and I would not support anyone doing that to put the community in danger to make any political statements. Just I don't think.
Let's pivot to education now. And she didn't mention or talk about the foundation aid formula or hold harmless. I'm assuming that's going to come for budget time, as I think she left a few of these things to the budget, including immigration, which she didn't say anything about. She didn't say anything about that last year at the State of the State either. For one reason or another, it could be a budgetary issue at the end of the day. She did talk about the cell phone in school technology and how she's going to try to. She didn't say anything, I guess, initiate anything today, maybe will during the budget. Do you support the banning of cell phones in schools?
I do. I support it in classrooms. So I don't mind. I always thought it's a relatively simple solution is when you go in the classroom, you put your cell phone in a cabinet or whatever, and you take the cell phone when you leave the classroom. Obviously, there's a lot of distractions. Hard enough to learn and teach students currently. When you have their cell phones, I can imagine it's very difficult. So it seems like a reasonable sort of in-between solution to this when you go in the classroom. So I do like the idea that she's talking about banning, in class cell phones. She's also talking about, what's the word she used? Not unwiring kids, but dewiring kids, whatever she said, and getting back into sports, drama club. I think that's whatever she said, but I think that's very worthy. But she didn't get in a lot of detail exactly how she's going to do that, other than build more playgrounds, which again may be a fine proposal. But we'll have to see what she proposes. I do think. I know I'm guilty of it. I certainly have 2 kids. I know how much we all use our cell phones and get stuck on that way too much. And I think it's probably healthy for us to try to get off that.
Is that at all a concern when it comes to, I know we've had a rash of lockdowns, swatting incidents. Is that all a concern for a kid not to have their phone to communicate with their parents?
So I think it is. That's why I think in the classroom, and we're not telling you can't take it to school, but in the classroom, I mean, there is something going, you certainly have access. This is not on you, so I think that's a reasonable sort of middle ground solution.
So last year, while we're talking about education, and I know she didn't mention the foundation aid formula today, but I'm imagining she will next week. I think it might have been the first day back, we spoke to you reporters, and you talked about school funding. I mean, we talked about different spending and how to spend it, I guess, smarter or I guess in a better way.
More efficient.
More efficiently, I think was what you said that day. And then she rolled out the foundation aid changes, which got a pushback from not just Democrats, but Republicans, everyone. So now that you said that came after that, and now a study has been done, where do you think things need to move forward?
So this is my personal view, not as leader, because we have differences in our own conference on how to do school aid. For instance, we have people that represent higher wealth districts. They pay a lot into the system. They think they ought to get a lot of money back. My feeling is we ought to have more equitable school funding and that's sort of what the governor's been proposing, where low wealth school districts get funded appropriately, higher wealth school districts wouldn't get funded to the extent they're doing. The one thing I think we can all agree on, we've been putting a lot of money into schools, rightfully so, and we want to make sure our schools are appropriately funded. That being said, this gravy train can't go on forever. At some point, we have to bring a little more rationality to the system. And I never say we're cutting, this is my point, we're not cutting school aid, we're just slowing the growth of school aid. The governor has pointed at how much we've spent in the last 5 years. It's really been an incredible amount of increase in school aid, which I've supported a lot, but at some point we have to, again, bring a little more rationality into the system.
Where do you start with cutting spending? Because I think some have said you need to look at the film tax credit, but that's what, $400 or $500 million?
$800 million. Good start.
Excuse me.
Maybe more, maybe you're in a billion
okay,
now,
but there's also, the budget is also billions, hundreds of billions of dollars. What do you think can make a substantial change in that?
Well, just as a general statement, we don't cut. All we have to do is slow the growth of spending. Over the last 5 years, we've increased spending in New York State by $60 billion. That's more than like 3/4 other states' total budgets. So if we just spend a little bit less, not cut, just slow the growth, would be much more sustainable. The good news in New York, revenue has been increasing, but we got to look at our biggest programs: Medicaid, education, health. All those are the biggest issues. I think we can do it much more efficiently than what we've been doing.
She's tried that, but gotten enough pushback where it hasn't happened. I guess where do you think?
Keep using her political capital. I mean, that's what she's got to do. And she's going to have, just talking about revenue, she's talked about tax cuts. I think that's great. But meanwhile, the speaker and the majority leader have talked about tax increases. Right now, they say they're on the table. So
tax the rich has definitely been a conversation that at least since we've come back, certainly that has been out there.
I mean,
do you support that?
No, I don't support any new taxes. We don't have a taxing issue in New York State. We have a spending problem. We don't need a tax anymore.
All right, final question is the same one I asked Congressman Lawler earlier this morning. You had the press conference today, very critical of the policies, says these policies have been ruining New York, and then framing it in the fact that you look at the presidential election, and a lot of people said that, yes, they're voting for this. Pete Hegseth on the TV today getting questioned. People say, well, this is what voters wanted, this kind of cabinet, this kind of rhetoric, I guess you could say. In New York State, it's run by Democrats. Democrats vote in the majority and sometimes the supermajority for the Senate, the Assembly, now for the governor, and then flip some seats. I guess, is your message getting across if they're still voting for not your party at the end of the day, the people of New York?
Well, a couple of things. One, what's the cliche? Imitation is the best form of flattery. You know, when we run a lot of these races, we find the people that we're running against are running the exact same issues that Republicans run on. They say, we're going to go to Albany, we're going to cut your taxes, we're going to, improve jobs, we're going to address affordability. They get down here, I don't see them do anything on that. The problem is, and I think Mike mentioned that very well, I think we have the right message. Sometimes it's very difficult for us to get our message out on campaigns. We're outspent 8-1, 9-1, and they're running on our issues. So I think the message is getting out there. I just wish the voters in New York particularly would know a lot that who's actually pushing for these policies versus who's just saying it as far as rhetoric.
Peter Barclay, thank you for your time.
Thank you.